Okay, hi Jen. How are you?
Hi, I'm happy to be here. How are you?
Oh, doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. You've got a book out called The Summer of Bitter and Sweet, and we just saw the cover. You want to hold it up again so we
Yeah, of course.
get it officially in there? There we go. Okay. And this is your debut novel, is that correct?
It's my debut young adult novel, yes.
Oh, debut young adult. Okay, how many others have you written?
I have one small press literary fiction book for adults out from a press in Canada.
I suppose I should ask the obvious question, why did you write this book?
The obvious question maybe isn't so obvious in this case. I wrote this book because I had been writing other novels and sending them out to agents and getting told that I'm a beautiful writer, but dot dot dot. They couldn't sell the book or they didn't think there was a market for the book. And I was thinking about quitting writing, and I was talking to a friend of mine who is a YA writer named Jamie Paxton, and I was going through some personal things. I'm a late bloomer, and in my early 30s, I was realizing that I was queer, and I was also dealing with a lot of colonial trauma around being someone who passes as white but has Indigenous ancestry. And Jamie said, "Why don't you write about that?" So I sat down and I started writing a book about someone who was going to figure things out a lot quicker than I did.
Okay, well, a lot of information there. One of the things that it says on your bio is two spirit people. Is that what you're referring to? Being white and
Um,
indigenous?
no,
No?
so Two Spirit is a part of the LGBTQ community. It is a particular Indigenous designation.
Well, I have never heard that term, so I didn't know what it meant exactly. Okay, so the story is the story about you? I mean, is the character in the story you, or is it just somebody that. Why don't you tell us? Tell us a little bit.
Yes. So the joy of writing fiction is you get to take the things from your life and from the lives of people around you and combine them with things you make up. Lou is not me in that she's still figuring out who she is in her teens. And the things that I put into Lou are things that I figured out in my early 30s. Lou is also her own person. Um, Events that happen in the book to Lou, like her first experience with her first boyfriend, are not things that come from my life story.
Okay, is the book out now?
The book was released yesterday, so yes.
Okay, yesterday. All right. And I forget if you said, is it self published or did you go through a publisher?
No, this is published by Heartdrum, which is an imprint of HarperCollins.
Okay, great. I guess what sort of other topics do you want to impress upon people with this book?
Um, we can talk about how it is a balance between sort of like a lot of heavy topics and like the sweeter side of life, the fact that there is still joy, even if a teen is going through some really difficult things.
Okay, well, I'm just looking on your bio and it says her nuance in dealing with many themes like mental health, substance abuse, racism, sexual harassment and assault, and missing and murdered Indigenous women. Okay, those are a lot of very heavy topics.
Yes.
And does all of that play into her adventure in this book? I mean, does she have to handle all of those things?
So one of the things about Lou's experience is that she is both marked as an Indigenous woman. She's marked as a teen girl. Um, and then if you start to look out further into her friend group, for example, one of her friends is bipolar and is dealing with a rough patch over the summer. Lou's uncles both have different experiences as Indigenous men, and Lou's mom has experiences with sexual assault as an Indigenous woman. So Lou doesn't, by herself, represent all of these things or hold all of these things in herself. Instead, her community and her family and the people around her echo different parts of these heavy topics.
Let me just ask you a little bit about the Indigenous people. Now, the Indigenous people are, I mean, you could say Canadian, American, but they're not really. They sort of transcend those
Right.
kind of arbitrary borders. So I would assume that there is a kind of a similar connection between all of the North American Indigenous people, I would say, even though there was a history of tribal conflicts, if you go way back.
Right. So yeah, a lot of the kinds of issues that Indigenous people face today are similar because of the different ways that colonial trauma acts on Indigenous peoples, right? So like things like violence towards Indigenous women and girls doesn't look towards your nation or your tribe. Instead, it is a violence that is experienced because you are an Indigenous woman or girl.
You mean it's just accepted?
Well, I mean, I think we can look at the attention that is paid to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls human rights crisis nationally in the US or in Canada to see what kinds of violences are accepted by the state and what kinds of violences are not accepted by the state.
Some of the Indigenous peoples have their own sort of court systems. I know the Navajo Nation does. They had a very separate judicial system from the state of Arizona. And if somebody was an Indigenous person, they had to be tried within the tribal court, not in the state court. Do you think that the laws in the tribal courts are more just than the ones in the state, or not?
I mean, I'm not an expert on tribal law or tribal courts. I think that if you have a culturally competent approach to something, that it's probably less problematic than approaching something without cultural competence. So that's maybe what I'm able to say as a non-expert.
Well, let's shift off that. Let's talk a little bit about you. And I'm reading here, let's see, activist, intersectional feminist, an auntie, and an accomplished armed with a PhD in English and creative writing. So are you a teacher?
Yeah, for my day job, I teach fiction writing at Loyola Marymount University here in Los Angeles.
Well, this brings up an interesting idea. Writing to me has always been a kind of a two-part deal. There's a talent in being able to create stories, but there is a craft in being able to pick the right words to use, right? Now, I'm always of the opinion that you really can't teach talent, but you can teach the craft. Yeah? So what
Exactly.
Yeah, so where do you start? Like if you have a student who comes in who you know has that ability, has the innate talent to sort of put together stories in their head, but they haven't a clue as to how to to write it down and express it. Where do you start with somebody like that?
Well, you start by letting them know that there is a thing called craft and that all storytellers use craft, and that if you learn about craft, that you can shape your stories in interesting ways and you'll make them more consumable by a reader. So the other thing that most innately talented writers who come into the classroom think is that they can break rules because rules don't matter. And one of the things about craft rules is until you understand why they're a rule and how they're supposed to be used, you can't break them successfully. Once you understand why someone says this is a rule in fiction writing, then you know how to undermine it and how to play with it in really effective ways.
Rule in terms of what? Grammar?
Well, so like standard American English is going to be the standard if you're going to send a story out for submission for publication, or if you're going to send a novel to HarperCollins, right? Standard American English is sort of what you need. But I'm talking about things like someone would say to never use an adverb. That's bad writing to use adverbs. And instead, you can think about what the adverb does stylistically, if that is something you choose to engage with, versus if you are someone who likes a lot of summary versus a scene. Understanding what a scene does versus what summary does will help you to play with those two elements and make your story stronger.
Okay, that's interesting. One of the other ones that I heard was using too many metaphors is not a good idea. Do you agree with that?
Who are you writing for? So who is your audience? And what is your style? And the further your style moves away from whatever mainstream fiction is doing, the fewer readers who will come to that piece. And that's not a bad thing. If you have a select audience and you know that you're writing for a select audience who loves a good metaphor and they like a lot of metaphorical language, versus someone who finds that to be purple prose, or they find it overwritten and they'd like to stick more with the action and less with the metaphors. It's really about who you're writing for and how small your audience gets. The further you get away from what we accept as very like Hollywood-esque storytelling.
Okay. Last question, and then we're going to wind this down. In terms of the publishers, the big five publishing houses, if somebody is an aspiring author and they want to submit their work, would you have one piece of advice? I know there's 1,000 things about writing style and everything, but just like, first rule for somebody who has no idea, what would you say?
My first piece of advice is going to be to take care of yourself so that you are prepared for an industry that is full of rejection. Even when you sell your book for lots of money to one of the big five, you will still face rejection in your future. So being prepared for the rejection that comes with the business and finding ways to navigate that for yourself is to me the most important thing you can do.
The emotional preparation, right?
The emotional and the preparation to keep persevering every day when people keep telling you no.
Okay, I think that's great advice. Okay, well, again, your book is called The Summer of Bitter and Sweet. You want to hold it up one more time?
Of course.
There we go. And it was released yesterday, you said, right?
May 10th.
Okay, so it's out and available. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, you can find me at jenfergusonwrites.com.
And information on your book and where to buy it and all that is on the website?
It's there.
Okay. Well, Jen, thanks so much for coming on. It was nice meeting you, nice talking to you, and best of luck with the